Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by the XO Christoph. Hey, Christoph.
Hey, Dale. Good to see you again. Good to hear you again. And I'm excited to dive back in.
So, where we left off, the American Revolution, we had just finished the Philadelphia campaign, and we were going to talk about one of the battles, because that's a naval battle in the Philadelphia campaign. There's only one. And then after we talk about that, we're going to move on to the Western Theater. So, you ready to get underway?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the battle, that is called the Siege of Fort Mifflin. This, of course, was between the UK and the United States. So, after the British defeated the American army at the Battle of Brandywine on September 11th, 1777, Howe, you remember him?
I do.
He did not go after Washington when he withdrew to Chester, Pennsylvania. So from that town on the Delaware, the Americans marched northeast through Darby to cross the Schuylkill River at the Middle Ferry. From the ferry, the army moved to the present-day East Falls, and that's where they made camp. So for the next 10 days, the two armies just, were sparring with each other. We're going to do a little attack. You're going to do a little attack. We're going to do a little attack. You're going to do a little attack.
As you do. I think that's gentlemanly, as they would say.
Yes. But during this time, the British did win the Battle of Paoli. And, a number of other different little skirmishes. So on the night of September 22nd, Howe actually outmaneuvered Dear Washington. And he was able to do a unopposed crossing of Schuylkill near Valley Forge. On September 26th, the British Army occupied Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's not great.
No. And you know who was in Philadelphia, right?
It was the Continental Congress until they fled prior to this exchange, I believe.
Yes. This was actually the second incarnation of the Continental Congress.
Oh.
And yeah, they fled to Lancaster and then to York.
Okay.
Because of Pennsylvania being taken.
Yeah, that's a good reason to do so.
Yeah. So during the summer of 1777, a guy named Philippe Charles Tronson du Corderoy, who was a French artillery expert, he gets there. Congress appoints him a Major General and Inspector General of Ordnance. And Washington then gets him and assigns him to the task of strengthening Philadelphia's river defenses. But, this guy is very, very French. So he was very, very aristocratic. And that started to piss people off.
There is a reputation there for good reason.
Yeah. He also began to fight with another Frenchman who was a military engineer named Louis Lebeau Dupertail.
Did you remember to not pronounce like the last 5 letters of the name or word? That's common. So it'd be like...
So that's Dupo.
There we go. That's it.
Okay. Is that every word or just the last name?
I don't know. That's just... I notice when I try to read French and speak French, I'm like, there's a lot of letters at the end that are completely unnecessary. And they give English a rough time, but French, let me tell you, they're gilding the lily a little bit.
Now, these two guys, they went head to head about the defenses and how they were to be prepared. And they actually, because of this fight, ticked off a guy named Gilbert Montier, who was the Marquis de Lafayette.
Ooh.
So this was solved when Corduroy drowned.
It would get resolved in a better manner, but there is some finality to that.
Yes. Now, he drowned on September 16th after he is, quote unquote, foolishly rode his horse into the Schuylkill ferry, and his horse leaped into the river.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Was the horse okay?
Unfortunately, we have no information on the horse.
Probably not then, because they would have said, miraculously, the horse survived.
Or they just didn't care about the horse.
That's true. It's a different time.
Yes.
Different time.
So there is a fort here, the Mud Island Fort. This was designed and built by a British engineer, Captain John Montsegur, in 1771. And the riverfront was shielded by a stone face. Now, they didn't finish this fort because the money dried up. But after the outbreak of the war with the English, the Americans finished the fort's defenses. They finished it with wooden palisades and earthen ramparts.
Okay.
And this was, despite the French fighting with each other. A little bit more about this fort. There were wooden barracks for the enlisted men along the west and north sides of the fort. And nearby was a 2-story building for the officers.
Huh. Well, aristocratic, right? I mean...
Yeah, well, the officers, they get their own building, while the enlisted men had to sleep right next to the wall.
Well, talk about military preparedness, though, right? Stuff goes down, you're there.
Right, let's hope you're not sleeping, though, when a cannonball comes through.
Yeah, that's true. But they would aim for the tall building, right? No, probably the wall.
Yeah, the wall.
Yeah.
If they're using mortars, they could go for the building.
True. Yes.
So, according to one of the defending soldiers, a battery of 18-pound artillery pieces stood at the southeast end of Mud Island. On the southwest end, one 32-pound and 4 or 5 12 and 18-pound cannons guarded the river. There were also 3 12-pound guns covering the west or the northwest end of the island. Now, other guys said that there were 10 18-pound guns that made up the main battery. And each of the 4 blockhouses had 4 cannons themselves. There were also sharpened logs surrounding the fort, while the low ground along the shoreline was infested with wolf holes.
What? Is that like a foxhole?
That is not like a foxhole. This is also known as a tiger pit.
Oh, okay. Yes, I've watched cartoons, you see, so I know what a tiger pit is.
What is a tiger pit?
Okay, well, if Bugs Bunny is a verifiable source, it's basically a deep pit that you dig, and then it's camouflaged on top, usually with leaves or some kind of light mesh, so that when someone walks into it, they fall in. Now, there is the variant that has sharp pokies at the bottom, but not all of them do.
These did.
Okay.
Yeah, they were called punji sticks.
Yes. Pokies is the, scientific term, but punji, historical.
There's a thing called Chevaux de Frise, and I'm sure I butchered that. These are a defensive obstacle.
Okay.
They are traditionally used for horses, for anti-cavalry, but in this instance, they were used underwater in the channel to prevent ships from crossing, because these were iron-tipped, so if you pass your boat over them, they're going to gouge your hull. And all of a sudden, you're sinking.
That is novel. Imagine being on the crew that had to install that.
Hold your breath.
Yeah, for a while. And then place them securely so that when a ship passes over... Oof.
So, there's a guy named Colonel Louis Nicola. And he was in charge of Fort Mifflin with a bunch of Pennsylvania militia. Most of these guys were pretty much just unfit for field service. So, they're sick or they're injured. So, instead of putting them out in the field, put them in the fort so they can recover and be there to defend it if needed.
Yeah, that's a pretty sensible plan, I would think.
Yeah. So, there were 60 of these guys. Not one of them knew how to operate any of the cannons.
Oh, no. That should have been question 1.
Well, remember, the cannon expert drowned.
I think this is an important time to reflect on the dangers of tribal knowledge and not having a written system for training. In any industry or position, you don't want one guy with all the knowledge because... I know at work they would always say, what if he gets hit by a bus? And you're like, I'm not going to get hit by a bus. There's not even a bus here. But in a military situation, or maybe don't send that guy, the cannon expert, to buy any bodies of water.
Well, kind of hard when the fort's built on water.
He should be by the
shore.
cannons. He's the cannon dude.
Well, that's neither here nor there. It's too late
guess
anyway.
No sense complaining about the mistakes of history.
Yeah. So on September 23rd, Philadelphia is about to be captured. So Washington sends Lieutenant Colonel Smith of the 4th Maryland Regiment with a detachment of Continentals to the fort on Mud Island, Fort Mifflin. This force numbered 200 soldiers, plus Major Robert Ballard of Virginia, Major Simon Taylor of Rhode Island, and Captain Samuel Treat of the Continental Artillery.
Oh, okay.
There you go. They had to go on a circuitous route because of, the impending British forces coming in. And on the last leg of the journey, they had to be ferried across the Delaware from the Red Bank, New Jersey, under the Pennsylvania Navy River Flotilla, commanded by a guy named John Hazelwood. Washington then orders a colonel, a guy named Baron Henry Leonard d'Arndt, who was a Prussian, to take charge of Fort Mifflin. Thing is, though, this guy was sick. He was not able to assume his command, so Smith became the commander.
When you said this guy was sick, my daughter said that there was a video game at the store that was sick, and I said, oh, that is the new cool. And so in my mind, I translated that this commander was super cool. I'm like, dude, that dude is sick. But you meant the literal sick, and so now I feel like a fool. And I guess I didn't have to explain that to the audience. But, I think transparency is what helps us be a cut above most podcasts. We respect the listener, and we will be straightforward with them. So, yes, continue. Sorry, Smith.
Yes, I will fool. Now, the who's in charge actually got complicated a bit more because Lieutenant Colonel John Green of the 7th Virginia Regiment actually outranked Smith. And he arrived with reinforcements on October 18th. And, of course, so everybody starts butting heads. So that's going to not make for a good working environment.
Right.
So, then Washington is defeated at the Battle of Germantown. So that's not going to help matters. So to help bluster the defenses and to deny the British the use of Providence and Carpenter's Islands, the Americans broke the riverside dikes. So this made the British build their batteries on top of the dikes and to build in knee-deep water.
That's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, just an example of the difficulties this made. The British lost an 8-inch howitzer.
Whoa.
And one of their guys drowned when the craft carrying this gun sank.
Dang. It's amazing how strategic things like that can have such an impact.
Yeah. So the British engineer, Captain John Montesur, and his crews began working on a battery on Carpenter's Island opposite the fort. And the British had already constructed 2 gun batteries near the mouth of the Schuylkill River. So they're getting their defenses up.
Yeah.
So on the 11th, Hazelwood and Smith, they launch a joint attack on row galleys on the guys that are building those defenses.
Okay.
So after they attack, the British suffer 1 KIA and 1 wounded. And so they put up the white flag. So the Americans, they capture 2 officers and 56 enlisted men.
Wow, that is impressive, especially at this point in the timeline. Like, America was kind of getting pushed around a lot, and so this is significant to have these prize prisoners.
Yeah, they quickly grabbed the guys, put them in the boats because they saw Captain James Montecriff coming at them with a party of Hessians. The 2 officers were later court-martialed.
Oh. Wait.
Yeah.
Which, the British officers?
Yeah.
Okay. For losing the fight?
Yeah. And for causing, inconvenience to the British Empire.
Is that... Okay. So speaking from a non-military context, I didn't think court-martialing was applicable just because you lose a fight necessarily. Was there something that I'm missing or some other component that would make this common, or was this a distinctly British thing?
This was a distinctly time of this took place thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get court-martialed today for losing a battle.
Right.
But back then, that was common.
It seems like you'd lose... I mean, not everybody's going to have a super high batting average, and even though 2 officers and, 56 enlisted men were captured,
Mm-hmm.
that's quite a blow, and so that's... I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to get in the mind of the military command of the British Empire at this time, but that's interesting. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah. And there also could have been more to it that we just don't know, but there you go.
There usually is. Oh, homework assignment for the listeners. Please find out why these guys were court-martialed, and then contact us. Let you know how to do that at the end of the episode.
So that brings us to October 14th. There's another French guy that arrives, an engineer with a very French name. that I'm going to attempt. Francis Louis Tessaderi de Fleury. He arrives, and he is able to help improve the defenses. He built a firing step so they can fire over the palisades, and he also built a redan to support the main battery.
Nice.
He also constructed a last stand redoubt at the center of the fort. And, just corrected a lot of some of the fort's shortcomings.
Well, that's cool. You see a lot of... it's amazing just the nationalities of folks that are showing up to help. I know it's mostly French, but I've heard you speak of some other folks like that. The Prussian guy, the Prussian and Hessians, I think that's common in Germany, right? But I guess
Yes.
different parts of it. So the different dynamics at play are interesting.
Yep, Germans.
I know, there was always... I would see this name of a Pennsylvania town called King of Prussia, and that was always interesting to me, because it's like, hey, I want to have a town named after me. Yes, we'll name it after the King of Prussia. What's it called? King of Prussia. Well, that's not exactly what I was going for, but that works.
Yeah. So, during this entire time, after the British put up their defensive lines there, they're shelling them. And so on October 20th, a British red-hot shot set off a minor explosion in the northwest blockhouse. And that's when Baron d'Arndt finally assumes official command on the 21st. He is the Prussian.
Okay.
And so he was taken on a tour of the fort, and Smith and Fleury, they watch as he becomes terrified because of the damaged blockhouse, and he announces that the fort was indefensible, and he leaves.
He just leaves?
Yeah, he said he was sick to his tummy. But no, it was cowardice.
Well, that is associated... I mean, as a recovering coward, I would get sick to my tummy quite a bit, so I get it.
So a Hessian force under Colonel Karl von Donop attacks Fort Mercer on the 22nd. This is the Battle of Red Bank. When Major Thayer sees that this is about to happen, he brings 150 soldiers from Fort Mifflin to help garrison Fort Mercer. So he and his men crosses that river in defense of it, and Colonel Karl von Donop tells the fort to surrender. Twice. And each time they were like, go stuff yourself. And so this ticked him off, and he was like, you know what? Fine, I'm coming in. So the defenders waited until these Hessians reached the abattis, and that's when they opened fire.
Ooh.
This resulted in a one-sided slaughter. The garrison lost 14 killed and 21 wounded and 1 captured, and they inflicted 90 dead, 227 wounded, and 69 captured.
That is... So, just to contrast, when we were talking about how the British were trying to put the fort together, and when the Americans attacked, I think the British surrendered after one guy was KIA and one guy was injured. Because they're like, whoa, we got to maintain the integrity of, these people. And the Hessians lose over 90 just dead. That's a very sharp contrast. I wonder, historically and culturally, what the mindset was that drove this, or was it the individual commander, the colonel, that just kept pushing them in face of this slaughter? That's very different.
Well, yeah, the guys who surrendered, they were just building defenses anyway, though.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were actually attacking Fort Mercer. Two different situations.
That's true. I guess I'm just not accustomed to... These are higher numbers than typical skirmishes that we've encountered. There are some that have numbers as high, but not as many.
Well, we're also only doing the battles that the Navy took part in.
That's true. I guess I hang on every word you say, Dale. You should know this by now, and so I'm trying to really put this in context of what I've heard so far. But you are right. There is more to be said, so maybe I'm just... This is shocking to me, though.
Yeah. So the next day was another bad day for the British, because Admiral Howie's fleet moves upriver under the command of Captain Francis Reynolds in the HMS Augusta in support of the assault. With the Augusta was the HMS Merlin under Commander Samuel Reeve, and the frigates HMS Roebuck, captained by Andrew Snape, and the HMS Pearl, who was captained by Wilkinson, as well as the HMS Liverpool, captained by Henry Belleau. There was also a force of 200 British grenadiers, and they were going to make an amphibious assault on Mud Island. When they were bombarding Fort Mifflin, the Augusta and Merlin ran aground. High tide came that evening, but because of the way the winds were going, the ships weren't able to be freed.
Oh, no. I mean, hooray. British stuck.
Yeah. So that day, on the 23rd, the American forts concentrated their fire on those two ships. The HMS Isis sailed up to the HMS Augusta to try to rescue them. And according to British accounts, they said the American gunnery did only slight damage, but that flaming wads from the ship's guns called Augusta to catch fire. But the Americans, they were like, no. We got a hit from one of Fort Mifflin's red hot shots, and this started the fire.
Aha. Nice to see propaganda through the ages. This is the second time you've mentioned red hot shot.
Yes.
And from the context, I think I understand what that is, but can you explain to the listeners, of course, what a red hot shot is? So that they've caught up with us?
To the listener,
yeah,
they already know. It's you who needs to know. So,
well, I am listening, so I technically am a listener. I just, sometimes talk about myself in the third person.
So you already know. So we're moving on.
You got me.
No, a red hot shot or a hot shot is when they take a cannonball and they heat it up until it's red.
Whoa.
They load it and fire it.
That's got to be tricky, because I would imagine putting a red-hot cannonball in a cannon. I don't know how cannons are loaded, but there is a powder element, and so the heat would radiate through the metal of the cannon, and I don't know. That sounds dangerous and tricky, but that's cool.
Well, the cannons are loaded by muzzle. They're muzzle-loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the powder's already in there.
Right.
So pretty much you just put it in there, it rolls down, and you duck. Because as soon as that thing hits that powder, it's going to go off.
Dude, That's nuts. That's similar, I guess, to World War I, World War II era mortar rounds. You just kind of drop it in and get out of the way.
Even modern mortars work that way. Yeah, the mortar goes down the tube, hits the strike plate, which sets off the mortar, and it launches.
Huh, cool. Thank you for elucidating that for the listener, a.k.a. Christoph.
He's trying to backpedal by trying to use big words.
Yes, quite loquacious, you would say.
So, about midday, the Augusta just blows. It was such a violent explosion that it broke windows in Philadelphia.
Holy moly.
According to Captain Montesour, 60 sailors, a lieutenant, and the ship's captain died while in the water. They say that the explosion was heard about 30 miles away.
That's massive.
Yeah. So seeing this, the Merlin, she's still run aground. And they see this, and they're like, nope, we're going to burn this boat and get out of here. So, arson, drink.
Oh, right, yep.
Now, when the Merlin blew, it did not go as big as the Augusta. But, I mean, once you get to the powder stores, anything's going to go up.
Right.
So, beginning on October 26th, a nor'easter comes in.
Uh-oh.
And this thing lasts for 3 days. So, a nor'easter, high winds, torrential rain. So, this brings over 2 feet of water on Mud Island.
It's already called Mud Island. You got to imagine it's difficult terrain, so to speak. Then 2 feet of water? Dude. That's crazy.
Yeah. But the benefit is that there was no cannon fire during this.
Oh, yeah, you got to keep your powder dry, and it's pretty hard to do in a nor'easter.
Yeah, you got to keep the powder dry, and, you got to keep yourself dry. They're like, I don't want to fight in this.
That's right. Can we just call timeout for a while?
Yeah. So by November 1st, the Americans pretty much had the British Army in Philadelphia effectively blockaded.
Nice job. That's an impressive feat for going against the world's greatest navy at this time. You're blockading them.
Yep. Howie's troops are now short of food, rum, clothing, and money.
Just because you have a shortage doesn't mean you don't have any. It's all relative. You should have a massive amount, but now you just have a moderate amount, and that's unacceptable.
Montesour complained that he lacked adequate artillery and ammunition. So the British, they were compelled to send supplies into Philadelphia via convoys of flatboats. And to avoid being sunk by the guns at Fort Mifflin and the Pennsylvania Navy, the boats had to make the attempt at night in total silence. So you got to muffle those oars.
How does one do that? Because I've done just standard canoe rowing, and it's pretty loud, especially on a still day. It's noticeable from a distance. Is there a method that they used or is commonly used today?
What they would do is they would wrap the ends of the oars in fabric and row very, very slowly.
Cool. And this is pre-electric age, so it's all lamplights and whatnot, and total darkness is total darkness.
Yes. Now, a guy named Captain Johann von Ewald, he was a Hessian, he said that in order to make sure that the sailors did what they were supposed to do during this extremely dangerous maneuver, they got them completely drunk.
Is that to avoid the danger, or so they would be more pliable?
That was so they can keep their nerve.
Okay.
So Washington holds a council of war on October 29th and orders Brigadier General James Mitchell Vernon to assume responsibility for the defense of the Delaware. There were 2 Rhode Island regiments of Varnum's Brigade manning the forests. And as soon as the last 2 units of his brigade were committed to the battle, on October 3rd, Varnum sends the 4th and 8th Connecticut regiments to garrison Fort Mifflin. On November 10th, Montefiore was finally prepared to take the fort down. By that time, he had 2 32-pound, 6 24-pound, and 1 18-pound cannon, as well as 2 8-inch howitzers, 2 8-inch mortars, and 1 13-inch mortar. So on the 10th, both sides just massive firing at each other at a range of about 500 yards. Now, that day, the Americans did not have any casualties at all.
Really?
Yep. But large parts of the palisades on the western side of the island were completely wrecked. On the 11th, that is when Captain Trent is killed by the concussion of a near miss as he was talking to it with Smith. Later that same day, Smith is in the barracks, and a cannonball smashes through the chimney and strikes him in the left hip. Even though this happened, he was covered in bricks, and he suffers a dislocated wrist. He survives.
That's impressive. That seems superhuman almost.
But, this also means that he has to be evacuated, and that pretty much leaves the garrison leaderless.
Hey.
Varnum, he reports that the troops would welcome a British infantry assault because the constant barrage was taking its toll.
Yeah.
Psychology. If you're under constant artillery fire, that is very, very damaging to your psychology.
Absolutely, because you hear the whistling of what's coming. It's just a matter of, is this the one that takes me out? Every time.
Writes to Washington that all the guns were dismounted except for 2, and that the soldiers of the garrison were able to repair the damage to the palisades every night.
Wow.
And that the only safe place in the fort was a ditch on the east side. And that's where he would go to round up men for work details, using his cane to get them out of there.
Oh, they were all cowering in the ditch? Or
Yeah.
securing themselves, I should say?
No, you had it right the first time.
Okay.
The next in line of command after Smith was Lieutenant Colonel Giles Russell of Connecticut. But he was like, no, I just want to go. He's like, I don't want to be in command. I just want to get out of here.
Huh. And Giles, this was an American?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know, like, the British aristocracy would a lot of times purchase their titles, their ranks.
Yeah.
It didn't seem as common or really happen much at all in America, but I guess it could.
It could, but it's not happening right now.
Right, certainly not. He knows there's a fight going on. They're fighting for their survival, and then he just says nope.
So on November 12th, Major Thayer, he takes command of the fort. At this time, Howe starts assembling a detachment of light infantry and foot guards, and he places them under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Sir George Osborne on November 9th. They were ready to go on the 13th, and were to be supported by the 27th Foot and 29th Foot. On the 14th, they planted 2 additional batteries containing 4 32-pound guns and 6 24-pound guns. So this just added even more to the daily bombardments.
Dang.
Yeah. You notice the guns are getting bigger?
Yeah. That's, I mean, at the beginning of this episode, we're talking about 8-pound guns. And now, well over 20. And that makes a big difference.
Oh, yes. So the British then brings the HMS Vigilant upriver to attack the fort. This boat had been converted in June of 1777 into a vessel designed for shore bombardment. So she carried 14 24-pound cannons, 2 9-pound cannons, and 4 6-pound cannons.
That's incredible. Well, I guess it is designed for shore bombardment, but that is a lot of guns on one ship.
They also strengthened her sides because she's going to be a target.
Right.
And they also had 24 sharpshooters and 50 gunners.
That is quite an assortment of folks. Well, let's see what happens. I'm not optimistic.
Yeah. So, of course, whichever side that they're going to use to bombard the shore, they're going to move all the cannons to that side. So they used water casks on the other side.
Oh.
To help, stabilize her.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I guess I always assumed that the cannons would be stationary, and you'd have half of them on the left and half of them on the right, and whichever side you're on, they would just move to that side and fire. But the ability to just push all of them to one side and then counterbalance the water casks, that's even more devastating. That's an incredulous amount of guns.
So this boat's commanded by Lieutenant John Henry. And he was like, okay, we're going in at high tide. And they work their way into the shallow channel between Mud Island and the North Bank at 0800 on the 15th. She was accompanied by the sloop Fury, who herself had 3 18-pound guns. So the Vigilant, she starts her barrage at Fort Mifflin from a distance of 20 yards.
20 yards is not a lot.
No, that's very, very close. You can see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah, and that was reserved for like musket fire, and now they have sharpshooters and massive guns. This is not going to go well, barring a miracle.
Yeah. Out in the main channel, the HMS Somerset, the HMS Isis, the HMS Roebuck, and the HMS Pearl, they start firing their broadsides as well. But, not from 20 yards. It was much further away.
Okay.
So, before the Vigilant even reached where she was going to anchor, the crew said that they have already fired 14 shots. The Americans had fired 14 shots into her.
Wow.
But after the battery anchored, this was point blank right into the fort. A single shot killed 5 American gunners at one cannon by itself. Thayer orders a distress signal to ask for help from Hazelwood. But to be able to do that, they had to lower the flag's fort first. And when they did that, the British gunners stopped firing and began to cheer. Because they thought, oh, they've struck their colors.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so when Thayer hears this, or his officers hear this, they're like, no, put that back up. And so it was like, okay. That meant that the cannon fire resumed immediately. The next casualties was the guy that actually hauled the flag. He ended up getting cut in half by a cannonball.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I know that's a possible outcome every time. Getting hit by a cannonball is not like getting bitten by a mosquito. But it's just...
No.
It's just horrible.
That afternoon, a chunk of wood from the barracks hit the artillery captain, James Lee, and knocked Fleury unconscious. But now, Hazelwood, he was seeing all this, and he brought his boats in to try to attack the Vigilant and the Fury. But the fire from the British Naval Squadron drives them back.
It's impressive.
So by this time, the interior of the fort is described as furrowed with tracks of cannonballs, and the barracks and blockhouses were wrecked. A guy named Osborne, he was like, all right, now it's time to go in. He planned to send 8 flatboats with 35 soldiers in the first wave of his assault, but Howe was like, no. We're not giving the order. I mean, that's 400 guys. He's like, no, we're going to wait for high tide. And let's hope that they evacuate.
That seems like given all the death and destruction he's inflicting, that's a pretty honorable decision.
So, that evening, Thaler gives the order to abandon Fort Mifflin. The 300 survivors and what equipment they could take with them were loaded into boats and rowed across the Red Bank. Thayer left 40 men on a arson detail. They burned down the barracks at midnight and then went over to New Jersey with the rest of them. So, yep, drink, arson.
This is a great episode.
At 0600 the next morning, on November 16th, the Vigilant launches a boat manned by Marines to take down the American flag, because they had left that flying.
Nice.
2 hours later, Osborne finally got to land all his troops that he wanted to, and took possession of the fort, or at least what was left of it.
Yeah.
They were greeted by one American who had deserted, and told them that they had suffered about 50 killed and 80 wounded. Now, a historian named Mark M. Boatner III estimated that the total American casualties was at 250.
Ooh.
The British losses in this last phase of the siege were 7 killed and 5 wounded. The British, when they saw what was left, they were actually very shocked at the damage, the blood, the viscera, all over the interior of the fort.
I mean, they shouldn't have been, I don't think. When you're firing cannons at point-blank range, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like, hey, this is what happens when you fire a cannon at point-blank range.
Yeah. So, the enlisted men, they start looting the dead for shoes and clothing. But the British officers, they started writing letters. And they admitted in their letters that these guys were like the bravest SOBs they had ever seen.
That's something. I mean, it's true. When you're under that kind of fire and yet you're still holding position and still fighting, you got to give it to them.
Yeah. So, Lieutenant General Lord Charles Cornwallis, he crosses the river with 2,000 men.
Whew.
Once Colonel Greene sees this, he's like, nope, I'm out. And he evacuates Fort Mercer, and Cornwallis takes it on November 20th. Just like that. So now there's no forts.
Oh.
And Hazelwood, he sets his ships on fire that night to prevent their capture by the British. Yep, arson, drink.
All right.
So at the end of all this, that means that Delaware is now open to the Royal Navy. And that the army that's occupied Philadelphia is now supplyable.
I'm sure Howie was happy with that. I mean, given how low they were on rum alone.
Yes. All right. So, yeah, that is the siege of Fort Mifflin. Thoughts?
That was one of the crazier exchanges. Like, just kind of how it went back and forth. America was blockading the British troops, but then it really swung hard the other way when the Vigilant and the Fury showed up. And having the right tools for the right job can really make a big difference. And I'm astonished at how much carnage happened in this battle. Yeah, that had to be demoralizing for the Americans.
Yeah, it's no fun. All right, so at the end of our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen angels with our partnership with HeroCars.us. So today we are going to honor Michael Anthony Monsoor of the U.S. Navy. His hometown was Garden Grove, California. He served with the Delta Platoon SEAL Team 3. He received the Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. His date of sacrifice was September 29th, 2006, killed in action in Ramadi, Anbar Province, Iraq. He was 25. Born on April 5th, 1981, Michael Monsoor was raised to understand the meaning of service to others. His father, George Monsoor, was a Marine veteran, and his mother, Sally, a social worker. Mike's brothers, Jim and Joe, also served in the U.S. Marine Corps. His sister, Sarah, became a pediatric nurse. In Michael's posthumous Medal of Honor presentation, President George W. Bush related a childhood story given to him by the Monsoor family. Quote, Mike had no complaints after the first week of kindergarten, until someone broke the news to him that he had to go back the next week. Many mornings, Mike refused to put on the nice clothes for school. Instead, he insisted on wearing mismatched outfits. Mike's mother soon discovered there was no stopping the determined young boy from mixing plaids and stripes. And years later, there would be no stopping an even more determined young man from donning a uniform of navy blue. Monsoor graduated from Garden Grove High School in California in 1999, where he played football for the Argonauts. He enlisted in the United States Navy in March of 2001, and after basic training and quartermaster training, Monsoor was assigned as a Master-at-Arms in Signola, Sicily. He was determined to join the elite Navy SEALs, and was accepted to undergo the grueling 25-week basic underwater demolition SEAL training at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. A broken heel cut his dreams short, but he remained in the Navy and persevered until he had a second opportunity to complete the training, earning his Navy SEAL Trident in March of 2005. Assigned to SEAL Team 3, Petty Officer 2nd Class Michael A. Monsoor was deployed in Iraq in 2006 as part of a task unit Bruiser in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He served as both a heavy machine gunner and a communications operator. Quote, he was kind of a jokester. Every time you'd see him, he'd have kind of liked his grin on his face, said fellow SEAL CWO Benjamin Olson in a U.S. Navy video. Quote, so you don't know whether he was scheming on something or if that was just his Southern California laid-back nature. Another SEAL teammate, Lieutenant Commander Leif Babin, added that Monsoor was just a hard-charging guy. One of those guys with just a great attitude, always put out, always had a smile, had this kind of crooked smile on his face all the time, and you could just count on him for stuff. According to Olson and Bodden, SEAL Team 3 was in the thick of the fight in 2006, deployed to Ramadi in Anbar Province, where Al-Qaeda had control over two-thirds of the city. Bobbin recalls, quote, for nearly 6 months, we were in almost daily and dangerous urban combat operations. PO2 Monsoor would earn a Silver Star Medal for his courage in rescuing a wounded fellow SEAL on May 9, 2006. His citation reads in part, with complete disregard for his own safety, Monsoor exposed himself to heavy enemy fire in order to provide suppressive fire and fight his way to the wounded SEAL's position. He continued to provide effective suppressive fire while simultaneously dragging the wounded SEAL to safety. On September 29, 2006, St. Michael's Day, PO2 Mansour's team left on its final mission of the deployment, about a week before returning home. Mansour and 2 fellow SEALs were positioned on a residential rooftop as a sniper overwatch element. An enemy grenade was tossed over the low roof wall and bounced off Mansour's chest. His quick reaction and selfless courage would cost PO2 Michael A. Mansour his life and earn him the nation's highest military honor. On April 8, 2008, President George W. Bush presented the Medal of Honor to Mike's parents, George and Sally Mansour. The citation reads, "The President of the United States of America, in the name of Congress, takes pride in presenting the Medal of Honor posthumously to Master-at-Arms Second Class SEAL Michael A. Mansour, United States Navy, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as automatic weapons gunner in SEAL Team 3, Naval Special Warfare Task Group Arbin Peninsula, in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom on 29 September 2006. As a member of a combined SEAL and Iraqi Army sniper overwatch element, tasked with providing early warning and standoff protection from a rooftop in a insurgent-held sector of al-Ramadi, Iraq, Petty Officer Mansour distinguished himself by his exceptional bravery in the face of grave danger. In the early morning, insurgents prepared to execute a coordinated attack by reconnoitering the area around the enemy's position. Element snipers thwarted the enemy's initial attempt by eliminating 2 insurgents. The enemy continued to assault the element, engaging them with a rocket-propelled grenade and small arms fire. As enemy activity increased, Petty Officer Mansour took position with his machine gun between 2 teammates on an outcropping of the roof. While the SEALs vigilantly watched for enemy activity, an insurgent threw a hand grenade from an unseen location, which bounced off Petty Officer Mansour's chest and landed in front of him. Although only he could have escaped the blast, Petty Officer Mansour chose instead to protect his teammates. Instantly and without regard for his own safety, he threw himself onto the grenade to absorb the force of the explosion with his body, saving the lives of his 2 teammates. By his undaunted courage, fighting spirit, and unwavering devotion to the duty in the face of certain death, Petty Officer Mansour gallantly gave his life for his country, thereby reflecting great credit upon himself and upholding the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. In his hometown, Mansour's alma mater, Gordon Grove High School, named Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium in his honor. In Lemon Grove, California, the Michael A. Mansour VFW Post 2082 now bears his name. On June 20th, 2016, the U.S. Navy launched the USS Michael Mansour DDG-1001, a new high-tech guided missile destroyer. PO2 Michael Mansour's story is captured in the book Defend Us in Battle, written by his father, George, and Rose M. Maria. So, Petty Officer, Second Class, Michael Anthony Mansour, we thank you.
Thank you.
All right. XO, take us out.
Sure thing. So, one and all, thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We really appreciate it. Every time you listen, it helps us grow. More people find out about it. And if you would like to either passively do it by listening and enjoying it yourself, or actively by telling somebody that you know about us and having them enjoy us, feel free to do so. If you ever want to get in touch with us, there's a couple of ways to do that. You can email us, number one, at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter. Our handle is at US Navy History Pod. And then we have a Discord server. If you'd like to get on that and exchange fascinating information and stories with fellow enthusiasts, you can. You can also find us on YouTube. You're probably listening to us on a non-YouTube avenue that delivers your podcast, but we're also there. But wherever you're listening to us, feel free to rate us. And we would like it if it was 5 stars. So feel free to do that. If you're unclear as to which direction to go, that's the right direction to go. I think that's everything. Anything else, Captain?
Just that we wish you everybody fair winds and following seas. Bye.
Bye-bye.